Okay, so for today's lecture topic, we will be talking about the integumentary system. Okay, so I think out of all the organ systems, this system is the one that is usually not thought about when we talk about the organ system, because usually when we talk about organs we only think about the visceral organs, right? The ones that are usually found located in our body cavities, such as what we have already talked before, our heart. And in the next topics we will talk about the lungs, and in the following topics we will talk about the gastrointestinal system. So those are the usual organs that we think about, right? But the biggest among all, the most extensive among all of these systems is actually our skin, yes, or our integumentary system, right? So I think the integumentary system personally is also one of my favorites, no? Out of all my organ systems, I think this is the one that I really personally uh, enjoy keeping healthy. So I really take good care of your skin, and I hope today we will realize why there is a need to do that and how this translates clinically to our animals. Okay, so among the four types of basic tissue, um, what do you think are the types of tissue that's present in the skin organ or in the integumentary system? Of course, actually, when we think about the integumentary system, the first type of tissue that we would think about that should always be present is our epithelial tissue. And in fact, it is the type of the epithelial tissue that is present in this integumentary system that would dictate the primary function of that specific integumentary organ. Okay? And we will already have an idea of which specific type of epithelial tissue is needed for this organ system to properly give out its function, which is basically what? The integumentary system is found where? In the outer coverings of the body, right? Which means its function is to what? Prevent outside materials or noxious stimuli from entering the inside part of the body and prevent the materials from inside of the body to what? Go out. Okay? So basically, it serves as a barrier. Okay? Of course, we would need the connective tissue to connect the epithelial tissue to the deeper underlying organ system of the body, which is basically what? Connecting this epithelial tissue to what? The musculoskeletal system, right? Usually, in majority of the surfaces of the body, the underlying organ system beneath the integumentary system would be the musculoskeletal system, which we have already discussed earlier in the semester, okay? And of course, we would also have our muscle tissue. So the muscle tissue component of your integumentary system is quite uh, special. Usually, it would be for mammals. It would be your um, smooth type of muscle tissue, especially for areas of the skin where there is a need to involuntarily what? Raise the feathers or the follicles. Sorry, not the feathers, the hair follicles or the hairs or the fur of the animals. And later we will discuss that apparently in the avian species, the muscle tissue that helps raise the feathers are voluntary or skeletal. Again, usually it is involuntary or smooth in majority of the mammalian species, while in the avian species, the muscles that control the hair follicles are skeletal or voluntarily controlled, which makes sense, right? Usually when birds have the need to keep their feathers upright to make themselves bigger, it is by choice, right? And for the mammalian species, when there is a need to raise the feathers or the fur, usually is for thermoregulation, right? And then what's so special about the integumentary system is that yes, all four types of tissue are seen within the integumentary system organ or your skin. Okay, this is really important because the nervous tissue is needed by the skin organ so that it will be able to detect external stimuli. Because without the ability to detect the external stimuli, then the skin cannot do its function, which is to keep the animal, the insides of the animal, and the animal as a whole safe, right? For example, as a human, no, if there is like a very hot surface, it would be the function of the nervous system, sorry, nervous tissue component within the skin to signal our brain that, oh, this thing is dangerous and you should not be touching this hot surface because it will and it can damage the deeper organs of the body. Okay? So when we say integumentary system, of course, first we will talk about the major organ that is a component of this integumentary system, which is the skin, right? So the skin, it is located throughout the whole body of the animal, the flanks, the back, the dorsal area. But of course, it is not just the skin which is a component of the integumentary system. We will also have the specialized versions of your skin that is found in the areas of the body that would have a higher abrasive or contact time to the external environment, such as the area near the mouth, which is exposed to food and roughages, especially in herbivores. And then we will also have what the hooves, right? Or in our case, in humans, the palms and the soles of our feet, right? It's quite different, but almost like a skin in humans, but in animals, depending on the environment where they are living or thriving, then there will be specializations in the formations of the skin system. If there is a need to protect the inner workings of the animal, for example, in the appendages, no, if it's always hitting the ground, the hard surface, then of course the skin will have to be in a form where it is resistant to these mechanical forces, right? So we would expect that some layers will be really thick, really hard, some areas will be thicker, or some areas will be absent because there is no need for it, etc. So we will talk about that later as we go through the lecture. And in some animals, instead of the presence of hairs, so actually the presence of hair is one of the telltale characteristic of your thick skin, right? And the hairs is usually for the mammalian species. But for our avian species, instead of hair, we have the feathers, right? And these feathers, they're still technically, they are like the version of the hair of your mammals, right? But it's still integumentary system. They are still derived from the skin. And of course, what I said earlier, some animals would need your hard versions of your skin so that they will not feel pain when they are constantly stepping on just this little surface area such as the hoof. Okay, so for the hooves, it's different. You have the hooves of the horses and the cloven hoof. Okay, so if you see here, oh, there's only one hoof, so all the weight of the animal is just in here. But in this case of the animals which has cloven hooves, it's quite divided. The surface area is bigger. So what does that mean for the histological structure there? We will discuss that later. And then, of course, our pets, our small animals, they don't have hooves naman, right? And of course, they don't have nails as well. But instead, they have claws. And apparently, these claws are just some kind of specialized structures that are also originating from the skin. And of course, for the animals in the western area, northern area, you would have the presence of your antlers and your horns. Yeah, so as Filipinos, then what we are familiar with are the horns, right? Because we don't really have deers or moose in our country. But still, it is worth appreciating that the integumentary system has a very diverse way of presenting. It's a very diverse type of classification because it really depends on where the animal is and what is their uh, physiological needs. Okay? So what is the basic structure of the integumentary system? So if we are going to choose between the two architectures, so of course the integumentary system would be, yes, it will be parenchymatous because we don't really have a big lumen, right? So again, it is a parenchymatous type of organ. And if we will have to master one organizational structure of the skin, it's this. It has three main layers, okay? The uppermost part, the one that is most uh, near the outside environment, is the epidermis, meaning it is epi above the dermis, which is actually the middle layer. And then beneath this dermis is the beneath hypodermis. So these three layers are the building blocks of your skin, and later we will learn that as we go on through the other specialized uh, appendages or versions of the skin, the ones that we talked about earlier, these three different layers will just change in shape and function and components or thickness or thinness, and because of that they will also change their name. Okay, so you can see here the dermis is actually the one that is readily exposed to the outside world. Thus, the topmost layer of the cells is actually non-living already. And this is so because the topmost part of the cell is okay to be sloughed off, or a part of its function is to readily give way and be renewed as the body needs it. While the dermis is technically the most important part, or not really the most important part, but it is the one that is carrying all the supporting structures that would support the function of the cells in the epidermis, especially the cells in the basal part of the epidermis. As you can see, in the epidermis, there are no blood vessels, right? And there's no hair follicles also. So the only way for the epidermis to survive is to get nutrients from the capillaries and the blood vessels of the dermis. So the nutrients will just diffuse into the epidermis. Okay, so the dermis would have two parts: the papillary area. So there are like papilla, or when you say papilla, it's like nipple-like protrusions, right? So here you can see there are like protrusions, right? And this is where there are the blood vessels, capillary beds. The goal is for these capillary beds, the nutrients will diffuse into the vascular epidermis, okay? So the thicker the epidermis, the more there is a need for the dermis to insert itself via this papilla. Okay, so if the epidermis is not as thin, then there is no need for this very developed papillary shape of the dermis. Okay, while the reticular dermis is the one that is found deeper. It is usually in the reticular dermis where we would find the secretory units of our sweat glands, as well as our sebaceous glands, and of course the bulbs of our hair follicles, and the erector pili muscles. Okay, and when we say again reti, what does it mean? It means net-like, because in this area, as we have discussed before, this is actually composed of what type of tissue? Yes, your connective tissue, specifically the one that is best described by the irregular direction of collagen fibers. Remember that? Yes, it is your dense irregular connective tissue. So the dense irregular connective tissue is the building block of your dermis layer of the skin. Okay? All right. And then of course, we have epidermis and dermis. In order for this epidermis and dermis to be connected into the underlying muscle or musculoskeletal system, you would need the presence of your hypodermis. This hypodermis is usually composed of what? Adipose tissue. And it is also in the hypodermis sometimes that some nervous structure are even deeply situated in the hypodermis. And in some areas of the body, the hypodermis will be continuous with the fascia or the connective tissue, uh, the epimysium of the muscle, skeletal muscle. Okay? So do not forget that, especially in the appendages. Okay? So here, if we will imagine, if we separate the epidermis from the dermis, here are the papillas that we were talking about earlier. Again, there is a need for the papillas if the epidermis is thick, because there is a need for these capillary vessels, capillary beds located in the dermal papilla to be able to reach or diffuse into a greater surface area of your epidermal cells. Okay? Because again, the epidermis cannot or does not carry blood. And why does it doesn't have blood? Because it's the protective layer. And if there is an injury here, it will not bleed as easily. So whenever you have scratches or cuts that do not bleed, it means only the epidermal layer was cut. For example, the paper cuts that are not bleeding, oh, that's the epidermal layer only. But once it bleeds, it means, uy, you have reached the deeper areas of the skin. Okay? So, for the functions of the integumentary system, specifically the skin, so we have talked about this already earlier. Of course, it is for the protection from the environment, from the outside. So, trying to keep what's inside of the body uh, away from the outside environment, which usually the animal cannot control, right? And what the animal can control, which is the physiological processes within, so the skin is also able to protect that, uh, especially from physiological fluctuations. So if there is an extreme temperature outside, then it would be the skin that would be able to regulate and try to not bring this extreme temperature inside the animal and vice versa. Okay? And of course, as we said earlier, we also have the presence of our nervous endings in the dermis, especially in the dermal papilla. Then it is able to detect external stimuli. Okay? So these external stimuli can be in the form of change in temperature or change in the surface texture, etc. Okay? And then we also have thermoregulation because it is the skin that uh, has your glands, right? And what's the primary function of the sebaceous and sweat glands in the skin? It is to produce what? Sweat, right? Especially for animals that sweat. And of course, as humans, right? And the purpose is to what? To cool down the body as needed, diba? And of course, there's also the immune defense because, as we will learn earlier, there are still immunological uh, immune cells that are residents of the skin. And of course, it is needed because, as we learned from the previous lectures, so you would have this in the presence or as represented by your Langerhans cell. Okay, so later on we will realize that in different organs there's always the resident macrophage cells which would tend to, its duty is to eat pathogenic substances before it can even enter the body. And these macrophages, they would what? Change names depending on where they are found, which specific organ. So for the skin, the macrophages are termed as your Langerhans cells. While in the brain, what do we call our macrophages? Our microglia, remember? Okay. So how does the integumentary system develop? Majority of the parts of the skin actually, not majority, I'm sorry. The upper part, the epidermis part only comes from your ectoderm. Okay? While the the dermis comes from your mesoderm. Okay, this is very important. A lot of students, they think when we talk about the skin, since it is the outer surface, then they would assume that the germ layer where the skin originates from is just the ectoderm, but that's wrong. It's only the epidermis, the upper layer, is from the ectoderm, while the deeper dermis is from the mesoderm. So at first, you would have your mesenchyme, and then you would have one layer of your ectoderm. And then what would happen is this layer of ectoderm will eventually divide, not to the side, but it will divide upwards, creating multiple cellular layers. layers. And once these multiple cellular layers are developed, the periderm, which is like a specialized version of your ectoderm, which covers it, will eventually disintegrate, okay, and be resorbed because a cornified layer will then replace it. Okay, so the periderm is like the outer covering of the developing fetal skin, and it is there so that there will still be the diffusion of the nutrients through the skin of the fetus or the embryo. But once it is removed, essentially because the skin or the epidermis, once it has the cornified layer, it means it has essentially what? Waterproofed itself. Okay? Once there is the cornified layer, the waterproofing of the animal is intact or complete. Okay? Which means water from the outside cannot readily go inside and vice versa. Okay? What else? Of course, aside from the skin, as we said earlier, one major part or adnexa or additional part of the skin would be the formation of the hair via the hair follicles. So technically, what happens is there will be the formation of the hair bulb. And what I want you to appreciate here is that the hair bulb is composed of still both parts of the epidermis and the dermis. So here you can see that the hair papilla is actually part of the dermis. Okay? And of course, there's also the formation of your arrector pili muscle. Again, smooth muscle in your mammals. But for the feathers, it is skeletal muscle. And here you will also have the formation of your sebaceous gland as well as your sweat glands. Okay? So all of these structures, they are what we call your adnexal structures. And clinically, also in the histopath, we will realize that usually these adnexal structures, they are the ones where there's usually very prone to errors. Okay? So usually a lot of skin tumors, they're not really coming from the um, epidermal area. They usually come from the erratic cells of your hair follicle or your sebaceous glands, etc. Okay? So, in the context of our avian species, of course, instead of hair, you would have the formation of your feather, which is technically quite the same story as with your hair, but of course the actual architecture is quite different because the function of the feather is different from the hair, right? And I hope you can appreciate that for the feathers there are several types of feathers because different feathers are located in different areas of the avian body, right? And of course that is where our basic body plan will go into play because the basic body plan will dictate the body of the avian species that, for example, in the wings, it should be this type of feather, but in the back area, it should just be this type of feather, etc., etc. Okay? So again, I want you to appreciate how really specialized the integumentary system can get. Okay? And then for animals that would need a thicker version, sturdy version of your epidermis, you would have the formation of your hoof. And here that you can see that because the hoof is really constantly subjected to high mechanical stress. Imagine, it's only this single digit that carries the whole weight of the body. So for those who are taking your equine medicine as well as your gross anatomy, then I hope you appreciate that the hoof is just technically a specialized version of skin that has specialized itself and created structures that would make sure that the epidermis would be very tightly opposed to the underlying dermis. So later, we will talk more about that, okay? And then, of course, there's also the formation of the horn as well as the antlers, okay? For the horn and the antlers, usually there is a really specialized structure, bony structure inside it, and the dermal structure is just on the surface. Okay, the main difference is that in the antler, the antlers usually is covered by like a velvet-like softer version of skin that sloughs off or detaches physiologically during seasonal variations. While as for the horn, it's not velvety nor soft. It's usually, and it's quite not, it's not muscular, and it's very uh, tough. Okay. So, what is the integumentary system composed of? First, let's talk about the mammalian system. Okay. So, for the mammals, we have the skin, and in the skin, we have the layers that we talked about earlier. Topmost layer, epidermis. Middle layer, dermis. Deepest layer, which connects both of these to the muscles of your musculoskeletal system, our hypodermis. And the epidermis, it is composed, majority of the cells that compose your epidermis would be your keratinocytes. These are your epithelial cells which have the ability to what? To harbor keratohyalin granules, which gives it its tough physiological function. Okay? And of course, you would also have our melanocytes. These melanocytes are the ones that would create the color pigment. And actually, that pigment is not only for creating characteristic coat patterns of animal species. Its primary function is what? To since the cells of your epidermis or your epidermis is constantly exposed to the UV rays of the sun, then its purpose is to protect the DNA within the nucleus of your epidermal cells from the UV rays, because the UV rays is very strong and it can actually what? It can actually destroy and deteriorate the DNA material. Okay, that's why animals or races which are usually located near the equator or in the direct sunlight, they have what? They have developed to have their skin uh, include a lot of melanocytes and a lot of melanin. Okay, it's basically just the again uh, structure which basically is dictated by the physiological function being required of the animal. Okay? And then again, we were talking about this earlier, our Langerhans cells, basically they are the macrophages of the skin. Okay? And then again, we also have another one, the Merkel cells. So the Merkel cells, they are the ones that is responsible for uh, what's this? Um, mechanoreceptors. Okay, they are the ones that's usually connected to nerve endings. So they are the ones responsible for the transfer of external stimuli, tactile, temperature, etc., into the deeper dermis, where majority of the nervous tissue ganglia or if not ganglia, afferent nerve endings. So they are the ones that are sending those signals deeper. Okay? So in the epidermis, these cellular components are arranged into several layers, or in our case, we call it stratum. So every time you hear the word stratum, strata, stratified, it means layers, right? So first, we have the outermost layer, we have our stratum corneum. Then in thick skin, beneath that you would have your stratum lucidum, only in thick skin, okay? But in thinner skin, usually there's no stratum lucidum. Beneath stratum lucidum, we have our stratum granulosum, then our spinosum, and the basement part, you have your stratum basale, right? These are the keratinocytes or cells that are immediately above your basement membrane. Okay? In the dermis, we have our dense connective tissue component and blood vessels and nerves. Okay? And they are arranged into, we discussed about this earlier, papillary layer, superficial layer, the one that is nearest the epidermis, epidermal layer, and the one that is basically supplying the nutrients to the upper epidermal layer via the uh, papillary formations, papillary shaped dermis. Okay, so usually they are called the dermal papilla, while the epidermal uh, part that interdigitates with the papillary layer is called the epidermal pegs. Okay? And then deeper, net-like structure composed of our dense, irregular connective tissue would be our reticular layer of our dermis. Okay? And for the derivatives of our mammalian skin, of course, we would have our glands and hair. And for the glands, we have our sweat gland and our sebaceous gland. Okay, so for majority of the hair follicles, the one that is usually constantly present, may it be a primary or big hair or secondary or smaller, simpler hair, is the sebaceous gland. Okay, usually both of these can be, their duct system is connected to the hair follicle. Okay, but some type of your sweat gland may not be connected to the hair follicle. So it's connected directly into the outer surface area of the epidermis. And because of that, the sweat glands that are connected to the hair follicle, they are your apocrine type. I think you have already heard of that in Beta 105, right? Remember, the apocrine type of your gland is termed apocrine because the apical part of the cell is sloughed off or secreted together with the secretions of the secretory cell. Remember, but we also have a type of sweat gland that is secreting its product without the removal of the apical part. So that's the merocrine type of secretion. Remember, and the term for the sweat gland that has not an apical type of secretion or apocrine type is your eccrine sweat gland. So this eccrine sweat gland, they are usually not connected to the hair follicle. Okay, so I hope the reporting group for the integumentary system will be able to discuss this in detail. Okay, so again, apocrine, the one that is connected to the hair follicle, and eccrine, the one is directly expels its content to the surface of the skin. Okay, and then in humans, we usually have a lot of eccrine type throughout the surface of our skin. Uh, but the apocrine type, it's the one that is found where? In the axillary region, in the kilikili part, right? And usually, the apocrine, it's the one that gives off the more sticky, more smelly version of sweat. Okay? But for animals, usually, oh, that's why usually animals are more smelly because they would have a lot of more apocrine type than eccrine. Okay? So again, that's the species differences. Okay? For the hair, as I said earlier, we have the primary and secondary type. Primary is bigger, secondary is smaller. The bigger primary hair usually is hair follicle, reaches deeper into the dermis, and then it has a very distinct sublayers within its core. It would have your the medulla and the core part. Okay, while the secondary hair, usually this one is just located supporting the periphery of your primary hair. They are usually located more superficially, and then they would not have your sweat gland nor arrector pili muscle. While the primary, usually it would have both your sebaceous type of gland, your sweat gland, as well your arrector pili muscle. Okay? And then this primary and secondary hair, they are found in follicles or containers. These are the containers where we find the primary or secondary hair. The follicles can be simple if it only contains one big primary hair, and it can be compound if it contains a few primary hairs supported by several secondary hairs. So actually, as a histopathologist, one telltale sign of being able to differentiate if the section of skin tissue that you are looking at is from a dog or a cat, it depends on the amount and organization of your simple and compound follicles. So for example, in the dog, there is more primary hair follicles, primary hairs contained in your simple follicles. And then in cats, there's usually the formation of a lot of compound follicles. There's also compound follicles in the canine skin, but in the feline skin, they are more fluffy, right? Their coat is more fluffy, like yes, not spongy, but more fluffy. So the fluffier the dog is, the more the secondary hairs it has. So in the cat, usually that's the default, right? So that's uh one way of how different species can be uh differentiated under the microscope. Very important when you're doing forensic work. Okay? Okay. So, another derivative or specialized type of skin, quote unquote, would be the claw. And this time, parts of your epidermis and dermis will change its name. It's not stratum basale, spinosum, granulosum, lucidum, corneum anymore. Okay? It will change. Also in the hoof. So because uh, their characteristics are quite different, so they were given a different name and the shape also. Okay? So in the claw, the epidermis is termed as the wall, and you would also have the sole, the deeper part. Another term for the wall would be the claw plate. In the hoof, this is termed as your stratum externum from the outside part, and then the medium, and then the medium would contain your tubular horns and intertubular horns. And then it would have the innermost layer would be the stratum internum. In some references, this is also called as your stratum lamellatum because there's a lot of formation of lamella or layers. So you would have your primary and your secondary lamellae. Okay, that's your epidermis. And then in the dermis of the hoof, it will change its name. It's now termed as your corium. So the dermis and the corium is the same banana, just changing its name because we are looking at a different animal and a specialized version of the skin. The corium would have several layers as well. You would have, of course, the stratum lamellatum, which is closely opposed with the stratum lamellatum of the epidermis. Okay? So basically, this is like just a more complicated and more intricate version of your epidermal pegs and your dermal papilla, right? Okay. So you would have your primary and secondary lamellae of your dermis as well, which basically interdigitates with the primary and secondary lamellae of the epidermal part of your hoof. So there is a need for the hoof to have a very intricate interdigitation. So para siyang Lego, 'di ba? Because why? There is a very, very important need for the hoof to keep the epidermal apposition to the dermis, right? So there is a strong, very strong mechanical requirement for the hoof, okay? For the horn and the chestnut and the ergots, so the epidermis is termed as your epiceras. Some references would use C instead of K. It is very hard and cornified, and the dermis is only also termed as your corium, and it's papillated in shape. And for the chestnut and ergots, usually it doesn't change the name, but the epidermis is really very quite thickened. And the key characteristic of the dermis of your chestnut and ergot, especially in your horses, is that there are no glands in there. Okay, so the chestnut and ergots, they are basically vestigial carpal and metacarpal pads. Okay, so that's why they are still very very thick skin. Okay, there's also no hair in the epidermis of your chestnut and ergots. Okay, now we go to the avian skin. Okay, for the avian skin, the epidermis and dermis are still present, so it's always present. And then, of course, we also have the hypodermis. Uh, Guys, it's worth noting, even in the mammalian species, sometimes there are skin wherein there is no hypodermis. Okay? Some areas wherein there is no hypodermis, for example, the lips, the eyelid, the area in the anus, areas which are tightly opposed to either the bone structure beneath it or it's so thin and there's no thick muscle such as in the eyelid. So it's basically just skin, right? Just um how can I say it? It's just there's no thick muscle for it to connect to. Okay? Unlike in other like in the appendages in the arms and the legs. Okay? Anyway, a key characteristic feature of the avian skin is that instead of keratinocytes, the resident bulk of cells that is found in the epidermis of your avian species is called your sebokeratinocytes or sebokeratocytes. sebo or sebum lipid fat, because instead of just producing just keratin to produce toughness against external stimuli, the avian skin contains high lipid because what? Lipid repels water, right? And for majority or for some of our avian species, they are their environment is where in the aquatic area. So there is a need for them to be extra waterproof. Okay? Because mammalian skin, although it's technically waterproof, it is not as waterproof as your avian skin. Okay? So for the layers of your avian skin, we have our stratum corneum and then our transitivum. The transivitum is like the counterpart of the stratum lucidum, right, in thick skin. And then we have the intermedium and the basale. For the dermis, we have the stratum superficiale. So instead of the papillary layer, we call it stratum superficiale. And the deeper layer is called profundum, right? When you say, oh, your thoughts are so profound naman, so deep, right? Profundum. Of course, in the ordinary mammalian skin, this correlates with what? The reticular layer. Okay? In the stratum profundum, we even have the stratum laxum and the stratum compactum. Laxum means loose, right? Or when you're lax, you're loose. And then stratum compactum means dense and compacted. Okay? What about the derivatives? Okay, we have the uropygial gland. So the avian skin also is characteristic because it doesn't have sebaceous nor sweat gland. Have you seen a bird that is sweating? Diba never? So it makes sense because it doesn't need that because the feathers are so specialized in their structure that they are able to also play a role in thermoregulation. Okay? So instead, what they need is again, for the waterproofing, extreme waterproofing, we should have the formation of the uropygial gland, aka your preen gland, wherein it is actually a specialized sebaceous gland, okay? And the purpose is to produce the waxy substance wherein the bird will use that to spread all over the feathers and the skin to make it waterproof and to maintain that characteristic. Okay? And of course, we will not find hair in our avian species. Instead, we will find our feather. Okay? So here you will see that again, uh, the feathers would have different types. Okay? Okay. So now let's see the actual histological structures of the skin. Again, epidermis, dermis. And the epidermis, you would have the different layers. And again, in the laboratory, please try your best to differentiate the different layers from one another. Again, we have the stratum basale, and among the different layers of the thick skin and thin skin, it is the stratum basale actually which has still have the live, quote unquote, cells, because as they go farther from the nutrients of the dermis, they will eventually technically die. And they need to die because they will be parts of a cytoplasm will be harboring keratin, keratohyalin granules, which are thick and protective because the function that they will serve is the outer part. Wherein the outer part, most part of your stratum corneum, its function is to protect the inner part, right? And actually, that's why when in the thick skin, or when you go to the spa and you have your foot spa, and they will scrub your feet, is the stratum corneum. These are the dead flattened cells that have cornified the keratinocytes, dead keratinocytes that are being sloughed off. And there's no blood, right? And it's not painful because there's no nervous tissue there, nor there's blood vessels. Okay? And again, the stratum lucidum is only present in the thick skin. Okay? And in the thin skin, it is only the thin skin which has the presence of hair follicles. Okay? Which makes sense because if it's too thick, then the hair follicle will have difficulty going out of it, right? And if you will see your skin of your animals, the paw, diba, it doesn't have hair follicles, right? Or look at your palms. It doesn't have hair follicles, right? You look at the soles of your feet. Is there hair? No, because it has a very thick stratum corneum. Only the thin skin, such as the skin in your arms, in your legs, or in the dorsal area of your pet, those are thin skin. It has hair. Okay. Here again, you would see the stratum basale, the dermis, the dermal papilla, and epidermal pegs. And again, the thicker the uh, the epidermal layer, the more there is a need to form the wavy papillary structure of the dermis, because again, the more folds there are, the more the surface area is increased. And an increase in surface area will what? Increase the possibility of diffusion of the blood vessels nutrients from the dermis into the deeper layers or the more superficial layers or cells, actually just until here, of your epidermis. Okay? So in the thinner skins, you will see that the wavy line of your stratum basale or your dermal papilla is not as developed. Okay? So try to confirm that in our actual slides. Okay? Again, thin skin, just a few layers of stratum corneum, and there is no stratum lucidum. Okay? Again, thick skin, thin skin, and the thick or thin is dictated by the layer of the stratum corneum. Okay? Thick skin, no hair. It's too thick for the hair follicles to go through it. Okay? Thin skin, it would usually have your hair follicles. Okay? Here you have your papillary and reticular layer of your dermis. And see, in the thin skin, the papillary layer is not as developed because there is a thinner layers of epidermal cells that needs to be supported or needs to have nutrition diffused into it. But if it's thicker, you will need to increase the surface area. Okay? So here is a diagram which shows the other, because majority of the cells that compose the quote-unquote living area of your epidermis or stratum spinosum is made up of keratinocytes, right? But you would also have your other resident cells. You would have again your Langerhans cells, which we said are technically the what? The microglia, the macrophage of your skin. And then you would have your melanocytes and Merkel cells, which are usually just found in the stratum basale. Okay? The Langerhans cells, they are found throughout the several layers of their stratum spinosum. Okay? The melanocyte, again, as we said earlier, uh, it is just in the stratum basale, but it would have these extensive processes which would distribute the melanin and give it to the nearby keratinocytes. Okay, while the Merkel cell, it would have these processes that the main function is to receive nervous stimuli. Okay, the stratum spinosum is called your layer which has spines because the keratinocytes there would have this spiny parts. And these spiny parts is actually what? It's artifactual in nature. These processes here, these are areas of the cells which are intimately opposed with one another uh, with your desmosomes. Okay. And during the processing, what happens is that the areas of the cells which are not in the desmosomes, they will shrink away. So the remaining point of contacts in the desmosomes, it will give the spiny appearance. That's why it's called stratum spinosum. Okay? Here you can see that in some very nice sections of your skin, you will have your Langerhans cells. And here you can see that it has very extensive cellular processes, which goal is to catch the noxious substances. Okay? So again, they are found throughout the layers of your spinosum. Unlike your melanocyte and your Merkel cells, which are only found in the stratum basale. So here, the clear-like cells, they are actually the melanocytes. And what's interesting is the melanocytes, they don't usually harbor the melanin because they are already giving it to the nearby keratinocytes, because it is these keratinocytes that are more exposed to the UV rays, and their purpose is to create caps or covering to prevent extreme UV deterioration to deteriorate the DNA inside the nucleus of your keratinocytes. That's why for people who don't usually use sunblock, you are prone to developing what? Skin cancer. It is very common because not a lot of people take care of their skin. So you should always use sunblock, especially in our country, wherein we're a very tropical country, and a chunk of our season is the dry season. So be very careful, okay? Because the UV can alter the DNA of the cell and make it erratic and make it uncontrollable, and it can divide and divide, and thus it can create cancer. Okay? So can you believe it, 'di ba? That's how amazing the skin is. It contains cells that would prevent it from being deteriorated by the UV. Okay? But of course, the Langerhans cells, the Merkel cell, and the melanocyte, they are very difficult to identify in Asian section. So the best way to differentiate them is to use what? Or whenever you see this brown stain, we will use antibodies in order to detect the specific protein markers in the specific cells. So we will be using what? Immunohistochemistry. As you can see here, the Langerhans cells, they are found throughout the thickness of the spinosome layer, right? And you can even see, it's very cute, the processes, okay? While the melanocytes are only found in the basal layer, okay? So, the keratinocytes, guys, all the other quote-unquote normal cells here, they are from the ectoderm, right? The Langerhans cells is quite special because it is from the bone marrow. It just travels here, right? Which makes sense because it is the bone marrow which produces our immune cells, right? And then the Merkel cell as well as the melanocyte is quite special because it doesn't come from the ectoderm. It comes from what? We talked about this before, the quote-unquote fourth germ layer. The what? Yes, the neural crest cells. So neural crest cells give rise to the melanocytes and the Merkel cells. Okay. Um, in the dermal layer, you would have the different types. The Merkel cells, what we talked about earlier, would have different nerve ending formations. The Merkel cells, which we already talked about again, is for touch. Okay, pressure, and we also have the Meissner's corpuscle. But actually, the Meissner's corpuscle, quite difficult to catch this in the tissue preparation. So I'm not sure if we have actual slides of that. I think for the Pacinian corpuscle, we have examples of this in the lab, located in the sole, slide sections of the sole. Okay? And here you can see that depending on which type of nerve ending structure you have, the receptive field differs. Okay, that's why uh, in the areas of your hairless or thick skin, there is a higher distribution or concentration of nerve endings, right? As opposed to the haired parts of the body. Okay, and for me, this really holds true because I have tattoos, and some areas of the body hurt more than other areas of the body. So while having my tattoo done, I realized, maybe it's because the Merkel cells of my uh, dermis is being reached by the tattoo needle. Okay, so it's interesting, no? Okay. For the dermis, again, you would have your papillary and reticular. And the hypodermis, the key tissue that is usually found there is the adipose tissue composed of your adipocytes. Okay? Thick versus thin. Again, the key point is that in the thin section, there is not as much developed papilla formation or wavy formation of your dermal layer. Again, all the blood vessels, or try to identify in the skin. Is it lymphatic, vein, or artery, capillary, venule? So try to detect those, okay? In fact, they are located in the dermal layer of the skin, and which makes sense because aside from the sweat, the congestion or the pooling of the blood in the skin surface. Remember when you are blushing, right? It's technically the blood rushing into these superficial small blood vessels. Okay? For the hypodermis, you will have your adipose tissue. And for the hair, for the big and primary hair, such as this one, the uh, hair bulb or hair follicle reaches the hypodermis. Okay, that's why for those who are plucking their hairs, your primary hair is usually more painful to remove, right? Because it has more nerve endings there and is more deeply inserted into the hypodermis area. Okay, again, if it is a primary hair follicle, it would have, aside from its default sebaceous gland, it would also have your sweat gland and your adductor pili muscle. Okay, so for the hair follicle, what's interesting about this is that it's basically just the epidermis which went inside, and the key point is that the dermal part is also present inside the dermal papilla. So, in essence, this is still the epidermis and this is the dermis inside. Okay? So, in the laboratory, I hope the reporters will be able to discuss the individual subparts of the cortex and the medulla of your primary hair follicle. Okay? And it is also in the dermis, as I said earlier. Oh, what's this? What's this black thing? These are actually your what? It's the tattoo ink. Okay? So, in animals, we usually use tattooing in order to serve as identification. But of course, for humans, so it's for the what? For aesthetic purposes and self-expression. Okay? So, apparently, it looks like this, but under histological, it's just so small. Okay? And this ink becomes permanent because the ink is deposited into the dermal layer of the skin. That's why it's painful because the dermal layer has a lot of nerve endings and sometimes it will bleed, right? Because there's also your blood vessels in the dermis. But it should not reach the hypodermis, right? Just the dermal area. And what happens is this tattoo ink is eaten or phagocytosed by the macrophages. What's the name of the macrophages again? Your Langerhans cells, okay? So they are eaten by the macrophages, but since the tattoo ink is so big, it cannot be fully phagocytosed. So it's just stuck there. So what happens if you want to remove your tattoo? What do you usually do? You will have it lasered. And what the laser does is it will break down these pigment inks into smaller particles so that the macrophages or the Langerhans cells will be able to eat it and eventually dispose of it. Right? It's amazing, right? So this is, I can relate to this much because now I have tattoos. But what's really striking is that under histology, the ink is not as extensively spread out. But if you look at it grossly, the appearance is more striking, right? Interesting, interesting. Okay, so here you have the tattoo ink particles here. Actually, the clinical application, there's also another clinical application for your tattoo ink. So, um, in histopathological setting, usually when a tumor is removed surgically, and what the doctor wants to confirm is that if they are able to remove the entirety of the tumor. So, what the technician would do is they would use tattoo ink and they will paint it all over the outer surface of the removed tumor, and then they will process the tumor as usual. And then under the microscope, you're able to see the edge of the surgical surface, right? Then the histopathologist will be able to say, at the edge, there's still tumorous cells there. So maybe the removal of the tumor was not as effective, and there is still a possibility that there are remaining tumor cells in the body of the patient. So that's one application of your tattoo ink also. Okay? So here, you can see that sometimes the ink will produce since it is the Langerhans cells of the macrophage that act on it, sometimes it can produce fibrosis or keloid formation. So some people, when they get tattoos, their tattoos are raised. So in my case, I'm very thankful that I'm not a keloid former. Okay, but I want to thank my Langerhans cells for really keeping the tattoo ink very neatly in my dermis. Okay, so thank you, Langerhans cells. Okay, now let's go to the derivatives. For the derivatives, we have our glands. No? We have our sebaceous glands. And we have already talked about this in VETA 105. So I hope you take the time to view our glandular discussions in our virtual histology YouTube and of course our reporting groups. So you would see that the sebaceous glands, the manner of secretion is holocrine because the whole cell is being extruded out together with the product of the gland. Okay? So these sebaceous gland, they are the ones that producing sebum, and the secretions are thick. So usually when this the duct of these sebaceous glands become clogged, this is when, and infected, this is where you develop your pimple and your acne. Okay, so the next time that you are squeezing your pimple, please imagine that you are hurting the duct system of your sebaceous gland. Okay, but anyway, uh, it is not good to mechanically express this one. So the best is to just use your pimple patch where there is the hydrocolloid substance that would naturally expel the infection out and the trapped sebum. Okay? Again, sebaceous gland, and the sebaceous gland is always connected to the hair follicle. It is never connected to the outer surface. The only type of gland that is directly connected to the outer surface and not the hair follicle would be your eccrine type or merocrine producing merocrine manner of secretion of your sweat glands. Okay? Here, as I told you earlier, we have the apocrine type with the apical blebs. These are the sweat glands that's connected to the hair follicle. But the ones that's directly connected to the outer surface, that's the eccrine. Okay? So for apocrine, apical part is removed and more sticky sweat. For the eccrine type of sweat gland, the one that is not connected to the hair follicle, the one that's connected directly to the outer surface, that's the more watery sweat type. Okay? Again, apocrine sweat glands connected to the hair follicles, it will have the presence of your apical blebs. Okay? Again, eccrine sweat gland is connected directly to the outside and it doesn't have apical blebs. No part of the cell is secreted with the product. So the secretory cell remains intact. While the apocrine type, the apical part is secreted. Okay? For the claw and the hoof, for the claw, it's the same banana, but the stratum corneum is much more sturdy and so hard compared with the stratum corneum of your skin, right? Because there's just a difference in the chemical composition of the hyalin in there, okay? But technically, it's the same banana. You would still have your epidermis and your inner dermis before you reach the actual bone, okay? For the hoof, here, the key point here is that the epidermis is again so thick and so hard. And you can see that the epidermal pegs is more deeper and more laminated because again there is a need for the epidermis to be very intertwined and to really oppose itself, stick itself with the dermal area. And if there is laminitis or infection of the lamellar area of the hoof, what happens is this structure is destroyed. That's why if this gets destroyed, there is a possibility for the hoof to detach itself from the dermal part, and that's so painful. Okay, so here you would see that you would have different names for the superficial, middle, and deepest layer of the epidermis. But the most characteristic layer of your uh, hoof is the lamellar area. So here you would see the epidermal lamella, primary, and the secondary are the small ones. And in the other side, the dermal lamella, primary, and the secondary ones. Okay? So it's really interesting. Please try your best to look at our actual slides because we have slides, we have beautiful slides in the laboratory, especially for the reporting groups. Please try your best to uh, carefully describe the different parts of the hoof wall in your video reports. Okay, okay. Here you see epidermis and dermis, primary, secondary, primary, secondary. Okay, look how high the surface area has been maximized, right? In order to make sure that the outer part will not detach from the inner dermis part. Okay? For the horn, more simple, but the key point is that there is a very, very thick and uh, outer stratum corneum part. So, very made up of keratin, but a different type of keratin. In the hair, the human hair, aside from keratin, there's also the presence of sulfur. That's why when the hair gets burnt, it has a characteristic smell, right? Anyway, the chemical composition of the stratum corneum usually dictates the hardness or softness of that uh, skin derivative. Okay, for the chestnut, I'm not sure if we have a chestnut slide in the laboratory, but what's cool about the chestnut slide is you will be able to see this is basically like your thick skin, like the foot pad or like the sole. So here you can see there is a very nice transition area of your thin skin, which has hair follicles, and the thick skin, which do not have any hair, nor that does it have any glands. Usually kasi, the thick skin of other areas of the body sometimes it's still possible to have your eccrine type of glands, okay? But no hair. But in the chestnuts and ergots of your horse, there's no glands at all, okay? So, again, try your best to identify where the dermis is and where the epidermis is and what are the sublayers of your epidermis and dermis, okay? So again, these chestnuts, they are the vestigial carpal and metacarpal pads of your digit. Okay, so they are called chestnuts because they look like chestnuts. In the avian skin, what we should appreciate is that it is very thin. Okay, it has a very thin dermis and epidermis layer. Okay, and thus it has a different name already. And then it has a very extensive hypodermis layer. And what are these structures? These are your, instead of hair follicles, they will be your feather follicles. And a key point for the avian skin is that instead of your smooth muscle in the arrector pili, you would have your skeletal muscle, which is voluntarily controlled, and the name is penati or penarum. Okay. Uh, the hypodermis is very extensive. You can see the fat layer. So I hope you appreciate this whenever you eat chicharon, right? The chicharon from the pig is quite different because the hypodermis of the pig skin is very thick and sturdy, right? So that's so when you eat the pork chop, imagine the pork chop, the thin outer layer, that's your epidermis and dermis, and then the fat underneath it, that's the hypodermis, di ba? And then it's the muscle beneath in your pork chop, that's the musculoskeletal system already. So in the avian skin chicharon is not as thick as your pig chicharon, right? Because it has thinner layers. Okay? So if you will zoom in, then you would have your stratum corneum, and then you would have your stratum germinativum. So the counterpart if this is the stratum basale in the mammal. Okay? And then in the dermis, you would have your superficial layer, your layer with the capillaries, blood vessels, and the compact area. But very, very thin as compared with your mammalian counterpart, right? Then the urophageal gland, the preen gland, the oil gland, the waterproofing gland of our birds. Avian species here is a bilobe structure. Okay, and we have a slide of this in the laboratory. So here you would have the different names for the different layers. You would have the lumen, you would have the outer sebaceous glandular zone, and the inner glycogen glandular zone. So these are the gland area. Basically, they will produce a waxy substance that the bird will manually spread throughout its feather to afford its waterproof characteristic. If we zoom in, you can see that there are, of course, specialized cells that produce this waxy, lipid-rich, fat-rich substance. Okay, so um, I hope you are able to examine this in the laboratory. For the feather, basically, it's just a specialized version of your uh, hair. So still, you would have your counterpart of your dermal papilla, and you would have the counterpart of your medulla and your cortex. Okay, so here, the specific subparts. Okay, so that's all for the integumentary system, and I hope that you are able to appreciate how a lot of variations are present in the integumentary system, because especially in our case in the veterinary science, different animals would have different environments and different physiological requirements. Okay, so please do not forget to uh, log into the attendance tracker. If you are somebody from the future, please do not use this attendance tracker. This is only for the students of Beta 106 in the academic year 2026-2027. Okay? Again, we have an online quiz later at 9 p.m. So please do not forget to turn on your notifications for your Google Classroom. So thank you, and that's all for today's lesson.